My sister died 3 years ago, and I thought the worst thing that could happen to our family had already happened. I was wrong. Because last month, my 7-year-old niece Bria grabbed my fingers like they were a lifeline, pulled me down close, and whispered, "Auntie, please stop sending him money. Just watch where he goes." And I swear, in that second, the room felt colder. I didn't understand what she meant at first. But what happened next changed everything I believed about grief, loyalty, and the man my sister married. My name is Athena Rowan. I'm 33. I work a quiet office job processing insurance claims, and I live in a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery in the small town of Rowan Oak. It's the kind of place where you can hear the morning delivery truck and smell cinnamon through the floorboards. It should feel peaceful. But for 3 years, my life has been a constant math problem I could never solve. 36 wire transfers. $2,250 every month. That's $27,000 a year. That's $81,000 total. Half my income gone. And I sent it willingly, because I believed I was saving Bria. I used to think being a good aunt meant giving until it hurt. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing my sacrifice wasn't saving Bria at all. It was funding someone else's comfort, someone else's secret, someone else's escape. My sister Sienna was older than me by a year, but she always felt like she'd lived 5 years ahead. She planned everything. She labeled bins. She kept folders for documents people didn't even realize mattered. She wasn't just organized, she was prepared. Sienna was 34 when she died, suddenly, from a brain aneurysm. No warning. One morning, she texted me a picture of her coffee with a joke about adulting. That night, she was gone. The first week after her death felt like walking through fog, while someone kept turning the lights on and off. The funeral was crowded, loud, and unreal. And Wade Purcell, my brother-in-law, looked exactly how a grieving husband is supposed to look. Red eyes. Shaky voice. Hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting. He kept saying Sienna handled everything, that he didn't know how to manage bills, school, groceries, schedules, any of it. He said he was scared he'd fail Bria. He said Bria needed stability. And I believed him, because the alternative was too ugly to consider. So I offered help. Not a one-time check. Not a few groceries. Real help. The kind that comes with direct deposit confirmations and skipped meals. I set up a monthly wire transfer. $2,250. Every month. Automatically. And for the first few months, I felt proud. Like I was holding the family together with my own 2 hands. To afford it, I cut everything. No restaurants. No vacations. No new clothes, unless my old ones gave up completely. I canceled every extra and told myself it wasn't a sacrifice, it was love. On weekends, I picked up overtime. On weeknights, I ate whatever was cheap and filling. Sometimes it was eggs and toast. Sometimes it was noodles. Sometimes it was just whatever I could throw into a pot and call dinner. My cat Gerald watched all of it like a judgmental roommate who paid no rent. But I didn't care. Because Bria had Sienna's eyes. That serious little look she got when she was concentrating. The same quiet determination. Whenever I visited, I looked for pieces of my sister in Bria, like a person searching for sunlight in winter. I saw Bria about once a month. Always planned. Always scheduled, because Wade liked it that way. If I asked to stop by, there was always a reason it wasn't a good day. If I asked to take Bria somewhere, there was always a reason it was too much trouble. But on the scheduled Sundays, Wade's house looked fine. Not cozy. Not loved. But fine enough that I didn't question it. Bria's hair was brushed. Her clothes were clean. Wade played the part. He thanked me. He talked about how hard it's been. He said Bria was his whole world. And I kept sending money like it was oxygen. When I called Bria, it always went through Wade's phone. He'd put her on speaker or stand close enough that I could hear his breathing. Bria sounded cheerful, but in a careful way. Like she was performing happy because she'd been taught that was safest. I noticed it faintly. Then I ignored it because I didn't want to become suspicious of a grieving father. And then there was Wade Purcell, Wade's mother. Lorraine never liked Sienna much. Not openly, not dramatically. Just in quiet, sharp little ways. She didn't like that Sienna was the primary earner. She didn't like that Sienna was the decision maker. She didn't like that Wade looked weaker standing next to her. After Sienna died, Lorraine became more present. She was always there when I visited. Cleaning. Organizing. Making the house look presentable. At the time, I thought she was helping Wade. Now I understand something else. Lorraine was covering. Covering for her son, and covering for her own fear. Because if she admitted things were wrong, she might lose access to Bria too. So she kept quiet. And I stayed blind. Until that Thursday. The day my entire reality cracked open. My afternoon meeting at work got canceled. I clocked out early. And I thought, I'm nearby. Why not surprise Bria with a snack and a quick hug? No big announcement. No schedule. Just love. When I pulled up, Lorraine opened the door. She looked startled, like she hadn't had time to put the mask on. And for half a second, she hesitated, then stepped aside and let me in. That was the first crack. That tiny moment where the wall Wade built around Bria didn't hold. Bria was at the kitchen table doing homework. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't a child's carefree smile. It was cautious. Measured. Like she wasn't sure if being happy would cost her something later. I noticed her shoes first. They were too small. The toe fabric was splitting, and one lace was tied in a knot like somebody had given up on fixing it properly. Then I noticed her jacket hanging by the door. Thin. Not a real coat. And outside, the air was already turning sharp in the evenings. But that still wasn't the worst part. The worst part was Bria's body language. She leaned into me when I sat beside her, and I could feel how light she was. Not growing kids light. Too light. I helped her with math. She showed me a drawing. She talked about school in short sentences, glancing toward the hallway like she was listening for footsteps. And the whole time, Lorraine kept wiping the counter that was already clean. Like she needed her hands busy to keep her face from telling the truth. When it was time for me to leave, I hugged Bria tight. That's when she grabbed my hand. Not a playful hold. A desperate one. She pulled me down and whispered so softly, I barely heard it. Auntie, stop sending him money. Just watch where he goes, you'll see. My stomach dropped. Because those weren't kid words. That was strategy. That was a child trying to warn an adult without getting caught. I drove home without turning on the radio. I kept seeing her shoes. I kept hearing her whisper. And at 2 a.m., I sat on my bed and opened my banking app. 36 transfers. All there. All clean. All automatic. And suddenly, the money didn't look like love. It looked like evidence. And I couldn't stop thinking about Bria's sentence. Watch where he goes. So I did. But I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. Not Wade. Not Lorraine. Not even my closest coworker. Because something in me understood that if Wade realized I was awake, he'd start hiding better. The next Tuesday, I used a personal day and drove to Wade's house in Salem Ridge. I parked down the street where I could see his driveway. My hands were steady at first. Then my heart started hammering like it recognized danger before my mind did. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I'd feel silly in an hour when I watched him drive to work like a normal father. I told myself I'd go home and apologize to myself for doubting him. But then Wade walked out of the house at 10:15 a.m. And he wasn't dressed for work. No uniform. No tool bag. No running late panic. He wore a new jacket, dark and fitted, and he moved like someone with nothing urgent to do. He got into his truck and drove away. Not toward any job site. Not toward any supply store. Not toward anywhere that made sense. He drove 40 minutes out to a townhouse complex in Blackford. Clean sidewalks. Matching mailboxes. Little potted plants by the doors. The kind of place people live when their life is stable. Then a woman stepped outside. Late 20s. Auburn-streaked hair. Neat clothes. A designer-looking purse swinging from her shoulder like it weighed nothing. She walked up to Wade's truck and kissed him. Not a quick greeting. A familiar kiss. A we do this all the time kiss. I sat in my car and felt something inside me go quiet. Not rage yet. Not tears yet. Just silence. Because my brain was trying to process two realities at once. Wade wasn't drowning. Wade wasn't barely surviving. Wade wasn't grieving so hard he couldn't manage bills. Wade was comfortable. And he had built comfort on top of my money. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what they did next. They drove to brunch. Middle of a weekday. Laughing like life had been kind to them. While Bria wore shoes that were falling apart. While Bria watched the hallway for footsteps. While Bria whispered warnings like a tiny adult. I followed at a distance, far enough to not be obvious. They ate outside. Wade had his arm on the back of her chair, like he belonged there. Like he hadn't left a little girl in a half-loved house. I didn't confront them. Not then. Because I needed truth, not drama. I needed proof, not a fight in a parking lot. So I went home and started pulling threads. One at a time. Carefully. I called Bria's school. Sienna had listed me as an emergency contact when Bria was enrolled. That small detail, something Sienna probably did without thinking, gave me a door into information Wade had been ignoring. The attendance office sounded tired. They told me Bria had absences piling up. Double digits already that semester. They had called Wade repeatedly. They had emailed. They had sent notices home. He responded to none of it. They were considering next steps. The woman didn't say the words report, but I heard them anyway. Then I talked to Patty Gorman. Patty lived a few houses down from Wade. We weren't close friends, but we'd nodded at each other enough times that her number was still in my phone. When she heard my voice, she didn't sound surprised. She sounded relieved. Like she'd been waiting for someone, anyone to ask. Patty told me Bria came over hungry several afternoons a week. Not can I have a snack hungry. Hungry like she'd missed meals. Patty said she'd fed her dinner more times than she could count. And then Patty said something that made my throat tighten. She said Bria once told her daughter, very casually, Dad stays at his other house a lot. Other house? A 7-year-old knew what that meant. I asked Patty if she'd ever seen Wade leave at odd hours. Patty hesitated, then said yes. Sometimes he'd be gone overnight. Sometimes he'd leave in the morning and not come back until late. Lorraine would come and go, trying to fill gaps. But Lorraine was older, tired, and no grandmother can patch a father-shaped hole forever. That night, Wade texted me. "I appreciate your love for Bria," he wrote, "but please don't stop by unannounced. It confuses her. She needs stability." The message was polite. It even sounded reasonable. And that's what terrified me. Because it wasn't a grieving man begging for help. It was a manager tightening control. He wanted the schedule back. He wanted the wall repaired. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt hunted. Then Patty called again a few days later, late at night. Her voice was low, like she was afraid of being overheard even in her own house. She told me Bria had said something during a playdate. Something small, said like it was no big deal. "Dad said things might change," Bria had told Patty's daughter. "I might go somewhere else for a while." I sat down on the edge of my bed and stared at my wall. Because neglect is one thing. But that sounded like a plan. A plan to remove Bria from Wade's life. A plan to make her someone else's responsibility. A plan to erase the last thing tying him to Sienna. And I realized something with a cold clarity that made my hands shake. Wade didn't want my money to help Bria. Wade wanted my money to replace Sienna. To replace the life she built. To replace the stability she provided. And now, he wanted to discard the child that came with it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drove to my storage unit the next morning. A small metal box on the edge of town that I'd been paying for 3 years. Inside were the things I couldn't touch. Sienna's things. 1 month after her funeral, Wade had asked me to take some of her belongings. He said he couldn't look at them. I believed him then, too. I packed 3 boxes, brought them home, and realized I couldn't open them either. So I locked them away like grief could be contained by a padlock. But now I needed Sienna. Not in memories. In proof. I pulled up the rolling door and sat on the cold concrete floor. The first box held small personal items. A scarf that still carried a faint trace of Sienna's perfume. A notebook with her handwriting. A card Bria had made when she was little, stick figures and crayon hearts. My throat tightened, but I didn't let myself stop. The second box was documents. Printed statements. Old tax forms. Pay stubs. Sienna's neat, careful filing system. And at the bottom of that box was a manila folder. 2 words written on the tab in Sienna's handwriting. Just in case. My fingers went numb as I opened it. Inside was a notarized letter. Not a complete will. Not the final legal document she probably intended to make. But it was something. A witnessed, stamped statement of intent. It said that if anything happened to her, she wanted me, Athena Rowan, to be Bria's primary guardian. Under the letter were 2 handwritten pages from Sienna. And reading them felt like hearing her voice again, steady and clear. She wrote that she loved Wade, but she didn't trust him with money. She had found hidden debt before. Credit cards she didn't know existed. Balances he forgot to mention. Promises he swore were the last time. She wasn't leaving him, she wrote. But she was protecting Bria. Because love doesn't erase reality. And weakness, under pressure, doesn't usually improve. I sat there, in a storage unit that smelled like dust and old cardboard, and I cried for the first time in months. Not just because I missed Sienna. Because she had seen this coming. And I had spent 3 years refusing to look. On Monday, I met with a family law attorney named Bridget Kowalski. Bridget had sharp eyes, short silver hair, and the kind of handshake that made you sit up straighter. Her office was simple. No drama, no fancy decor. Just organization. Like she had built a career out of turning chaos into paperwork. I laid everything on her desk. The wire transfers. The school absences. Patty's account. My notes about Wade's weekday, brunch life. And Sienna's notarized letter. Bridget listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You did the right thing coming here first." Then she added, "But you have to be careful. Because in cases like this, emotion is a trap. If I confronted Wade too soon, he'd hide assets, coach Bria, prepare a story. If I stopped sending money, he'd know something changed. And if he sensed a threat, he might move faster to get rid of Bria." Bridget's instruction shocked me. "Keep sending the monthly transfer," she said. "Keep the pattern, keep it clean. Let him think you're still the same." My stomach turned. But I understood. Justice doesn't always start with a loud confrontation. Sometimes it starts by staying calm while you sharpen the knife. A legal knife. A paperwork knife. The kind that doesn't break rules. The kind that holds up in court. I paid Bridget a reduced retainer using my emergency savings. The same savings I'd built for car repairs and medical bills. Turns out, it was actually for dismantling my brother-in-law's lies. Before I left, Bridget gave me a list. "We need documentation of Bria's current condition," she said. "We need financial records through legal discovery. And we need anything showing he's planning abandonment." I nodded and walked out feeling both terrified and steady. Because for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't just sending money. I was moving. I kept working my day job, answering emails like my life wasn't on fire. But every spare hour became a mission. I documented everything. Photos of Bria's shoes from my surprise visit. Notes from phone calls. Dates and times. Bridget filed the custody petition. That triggered legal discovery, requests for Wade's financial records. And when those statements came back, I sat in Bridget's office and felt my blood pressure spike. Because the numbers weren't messy. They were consistent. Predictable. Like Wade had built a whole routine around betrayal. There were monthly transfers from Wade's account to an address in Blackford. Rent-level payments. There were restaurants, lots of them. There were clothing stores that weren't budget stores. There was a weekend charge, the seaside resort in Seabrook Bay. And then there was the part that made me go completely still. Bria-related spending was almost non-existent. Not low. Not less than expected. Almost zero. No pediatrician payments. No school supply stores. No kids' clothing. No pharmacy receipts that look like a child's needs. It was like Bria existed only as a reason to receive money, not as a person to care for. I looked at Bridget and whispered, "So where did Bria's money go?" Bridget didn't flinch. She tapped the highlighted sections and said, "It went where Wade wanted it to go." Then she added, "And now we prove it." But we still needed one more piece. The woman. The secret life. Because I had a strong feeling Wade wasn't just lying to me. He was lying to her too. And if she realized she was living inside stolen money, she might become the witness we needed. Her name was Kendra Feltz. I learned it through the address records tied to Wade's transfers. Bridget warned me to stay calm. "Don't threaten her," she said. "Don't accuse her. Give her facts and let her reveal her own truth." So I contacted Kendra through a public message system. Short, respectful, direct. "Hi, Kendra. My name is Athena Rowan. I'm Bria's aunt. We need to talk about something important." She didn't reply for 2 days. Those 2 days felt like sitting in a car that won't start while smoke comes from under the hood. Then she wrote back, "What is this about?" We met in a neutral coffee shop in Christiansburg Falls. Public, bright, safe. Kendra looked confident walking in until she saw my face. Because I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. And that kind of exhaustion scares people. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I placed my phone on the table and showed her the wire transfer dates. Then I showed her the dates of her posts on a social app, photos of new purchases, trips, dinners. No brand names, just timestamps. And the patterns lined up like a heartbeat. Transfer, purchase. Transfer, dinner. Transfer, trip. Kendra's face drained of color slowly, like her body took time to accept what her mind refused to. She shook her head and said Wade told her he did private contract work. She said he claimed he had big clients. She said she believed him because he sounded confident. And I believed her because I'd believed him too. I leaned forward and said, quietly, "A 7-year-old girl has been going hungry while this money paid for an adult lifestyle." Kendra's eyes filled. Not the dramatic kind of crying. The stunned kind. The kind that happens when you realize you've been living in a lie without knowing it. She asked for time. I gave it. 2 days later, she texted me. "I checked his phone," she wrote. "I found your name, I feel sick." Then she wrote something that made my stomach turn again. "He talks about Bria like she's a problem he has to solve." Kendra said Wade had made comments about making arrangements. About Bria staying with someone else. At the time, Kendra thought it was co-parenting logistics. Now she realized it was a father planning his exit. Kendra agreed to sign a statement. Not out of revenge. Out of disgust. Out of a sudden need to make things right. But the biggest confirmation came from a place I didn't expect. Bridget made a formal inquiry to the county's Family Services office. And the record came back with a date. Wade had contacted them weeks earlier. Not to ask for help. Not to ask for resources. He had asked about voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. The process. The timeline. Where the child would go. What paperwork was needed. It was real. It was documented. And it meant we were running out of time. If Wade filed first, Bria could be pushed into the system temporarily, even if family stepped in later. And I refused to let my sister's child become a file number because Wade wanted a clean new life. Bridget filed an emergency motion. Imminent abandonment. Documented neglect. Financial misuse. Witness statements. School records. Everything stacked together like bricks. Wade was served papers on a Tuesday morning. And within 20 minutes, he called me. His voice was calm, like he was reading from a script he'd practiced. "Athena," he said, "I don't know what you think you know, but this is unnecessary. We're family. Let's talk without lawyers." My hands shook, but my voice didn't. "I'm not discussing this directly," I said. "My attorney will contact yours." And I hung up. That was the moment I understood something important. Wade wasn't panicking because he was innocent. He was calm because he thought he could manage me the way he always had. With reasonable words. With guilt. With the family card. But this time, I wasn't playing his game. He hired an attorney quickly. A man named Ray Scuttle. Small practice, big confidence. Wade probably assumed he'd charm his way out of it. That he'd paint me as an overstepping aunt. A single woman with no children trying to steal a father's rights. I could already hear the narrative he wanted. And that's why Bridget's strategy mattered. No speeches. No yelling. No messy emotions. Just paper. Just math. Just proof. Bridget scheduled a settlement conference in her office. If Wade agreed, we could resolve custody without a long trial. If he didn't, we'd go to court and let a judge read every line of his life. The night before the conference, I barely slept. I kept thinking of Bria's whisper. I kept thinking of Sienna's letter. And I kept thinking about how many times I had told myself, "It's fine," because it was easier than asking, "Is it true?" The conference room was small. A wooden table. Fluorescent lights that hummed softly. A water pitcher no one touched. On my side sat me and Bridget. Bridget's binder was thick, tabbed, and color-coded. She set it on the table like a person placing truth down carefully. Across from us sat Wade and Ray. Wade wore a new button-down shirt. He looked composed. Not grieving. Not struggling. Just prepared. For a moment, he gave me a sad look. Like I was the one betraying him. Like I was the problem. And I almost felt that old reflex, guilt, rise in my chest. But then I remembered Bria's shoes. And guilt turned into steel. Bridget didn't do small talk. She didn't explain herself. She opened the binder and slid documents onto the table one by one. First, the 36 wire transfer receipts. All dated. All identical amounts. All from me to Wade. She didn't speak. She let the repetition tell its own story. Then she placed the bank statements down. Highlighted. Organized. Rent payments to Blackford. Restaurants. Clothing. The Seabrook Bay resort charge. A lifestyle built from a pipeline of my trust. Then she placed Bria's school attendance records. Absences. Unanswered calls. Documented warnings. Then Patty Gorman's notarized statement. A neighbor describing a hungry child coming to her house again and again. Then a counselor's report about behavioral shifts. Withdrawal. Fear. A child mentioning she might go somewhere else. Then Kendra Feltz's signed statement. That Wade had misrepresented his income. That he had talked about arrangements for Bria. That Kendra now understood the money source. Then the family services record. Wade's inquiry about relinquishing parental rights. And finally, Bridget placed Sienna's notarized letter in the center. She set it down gently. Like it mattered. Because it did. Sienna's handwriting stared up at Wade like a ghost with receipts. The room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Heavy quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when lies run out of air. Wade's expression changed in slow stages. At first he looked annoyed, like this was all dramatic. Then his jaw tightened. Then his eyes flickered toward Ray. Then his hands flattened on the table, as if his body was trying to anchor him. Ray Scuttle read through everything. No objections. No clever arguments. No dramatic scoff. Just silence and scanning eyes. When he finished, he leaned toward Wade and whispered, "We need to talk in the hall." They left the room. The door clicked shut. And my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. I stared at the untouched water glasses. Bridget sat perfectly still, like she'd already seen the ending. "Do you think he'll fight?" I whispered. Bridget didn't look at me. She just said, "The documents will decide what he can afford to do." They were gone for about 10 minutes. When they returned, Wade looked different. Not angry. Not defiant. Empty. Like the energy it took to perform had drained out of him all at once. Ray spoke first. Professional voice. My client is prepared to discuss terms. I didn't breathe until Bridget started listing them. Full legal and physical custody of Bria transferred to me. Stood up and walked out without a word. Ray shook hands, gathered his file, and followed. And suddenly, it was just me and Bridget in a fluorescent-lit room, with proof scattered across a table. Bridget closed the binder and nodded once. "Bria is safe," she said. I didn't cry then either. I felt something else. A deep, quiet exhale. Like my body had been holding its breath for 3 years, and finally remembered how to breathe. That afternoon, I drove to Bria's school. I joined the pickup line like a normal parent. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. When Bria walked out with her backpack, she scanned the cars. Then she saw my Kia Sorento. And her face lit up in a way that made my chest ache. Not a careful smile. A real one. She ran to the car and climbed into the back seat. Then she looked at me through the mirror and asked, "Are we going home, Auntie?" And I realized something. Home isn't a building. Home is the place you stop being afraid. "Yes," I told her, "we're going home." If you're still watching right now, stay with me, because what happened after Bria moved in was the part I didn't expect. The custody transfer was finalized weeks later. Paperwork, signatures, court stamps, the boring mechanics of justice. But the real change happened in small moments. The first week, Bria ate like she wasn't sure dinner would happen again tomorrow. She took tiny bites, watching my face. I kept my voice gentle. I told her she could have more, anytime. I put a fruit bowl on the table and told her she didn't have to ask to eat. It took days before she believed me. The first night, she woke up twice. Not crying. Just quietly standing in the hallway like she didn't know where she was allowed to exist. I led her back to bed, tucked her in, and sat with her until her breathing slowed. I bought her new shoes. Not fancy. Just shoes that fit. I bought a winter coat that could handle cold evenings. I bought school supplies without calculating whether it would break me. And every time I spent money on Bria, I felt something heal. Like the money was finally doing what it was meant to do. Gerald didn't handle the transition with grace. For the first few days, he stayed on top of the refrigerator like a suspicious landlord. Then he migrated to the couch. Then, one evening, I found him at the foot of Bria's bed. He pretended it was an accident. But I saw the truth. Even Gerald knew she belonged. Lorraine called about a month later. Not Wade, Lorraine. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard. No defensiveness. No excuses. Just a quiet request. "Can I see Bria?" And here's the hard truth about revenge stories. Real justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about breaking cycles. Lorraine had covered for her son, yes. But she had also kept Bria from falling completely through the cracks. Fear makes people do cowardly things. It doesn't excuse them, but it explains them. So I said yes. Lorraine came on a Sunday afternoon with homemade cookies. Bria ran to the door and hugged her. Lorraine's eyes filled, and she wiped them quickly like she didn't want Bria to see. They watched cartoons together while I cleaned the kitchen I didn't really need to clean. We didn't talk about Wade. We didn't have to, because the truth was sitting right there on my couch, alive and safe. Bria's teacher emailed me later. Not a complaint. A thank you. She wrote that Bria was participating in class again. Laughing. Sharing drawings. Showing pride. Perfect attendance. A child returning to herself. And one night, while I washed dishes, Bria slid a piece of paper across the table. "This is for you," she said. It was a drawing. 3 figures. One tall, labeled Auntie. One small, labeled me. And above them, a third figure with yellow wings labeled Mommy. At the bottom, in wobbly, careful handwriting, it said, "My family." I stared at it until my eyes blurred. Bria watched me, quiet and serious, like she was waiting to see if I understood what she was offering me. Not just a picture. A bond. A new shape of family, built out of loss and protection. I reached across the table and held her hand. And I realized something that made my throat tighten. Sienna's folder said, "just in case." She didn't want to believe she'd die. But she planned like a mother anyway. She built a door for Bria to escape through. And even though it took me 3 years to open it, I opened it. Wade started restitution payments once he found work again. They weren't huge, but they were automatic. Enforced. Accountable. And the fraud referral Bridget prepared stayed filed away like a storm cloud Wade could see from miles away. A reminder that manipulation survives on silence. But consequences survive on paper. I don't know what Wade's life looks like now. And I don't spend energy imagining it. Because the goal was never to destroy him. The goal was to save Bria. And that's the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge wants pain. Justice wants protection. Now, my apartment is smaller than before in the best possible way. There are crayons on my table. A little backpack by the door. A nightlight shaped like a star in Bria's corner. And oatmeal on most mornings, because it's cheap and warm and reliable. Some habits stay. But now they don't feel like survival. They feel like stability. And stability is a kind of wealth no bank statement can measure. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's this. Love without boundaries is easy to exploit. Grief can be used as a mask. And family can become the most dangerous word if you let it replace evidence. If something feels off, don't ignore it to keep the peace. Ask questions. Document the truth. And protect the child who can't protect themselves. Bria once whispered to me to watch where Wade went. She was right. And that whisper saved her life, not from violence, but from abandonment. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and comment what you would have done in my place. And if you've ever been the person carrying a family on your back, I want you to remember this. You're not too much for asking for truth. You're not mean for requiring accountability. And you're not powerless just because you cared.